Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome you all to a brand new episode of Transformation Talks. I am Yasmin Taj, editor, ETHRWorld International, and head branded content at the Economic Times. It is such a pleasure to meet you all once again. For those of you who are new to the Transformation Talks series, as part of this LinkedIn Live talk show, I host global leaders and HR tech influencers from around the globe and urge them to share experiences from the new world of work that we are all part of through transformation stories about talent, technology, and leadership. And today, it gives me immense pleasure to host the famously known father of modern HR, Dave Ulrich. Dave is Rensselaer's Likert Professor at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan, and a partner at the RBL Group, a consulting firm focused on helping organizations and leaders deliver value. He has published over 200 articles and book chapters and over 30 books. Welcome, Dave. It is such a pleasure to host you today.
Yasmin, what a privilege to be with you. Thank you so much. And thank you for letting me chat with you about topics that we're both very interested in. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I couldn't have been more excited than this, Dave. But before we start our conversation, I would like to share a little bit more about the topic today with our audience today. So, leadership is not a new concept. What is new and fascinating is how it keeps on evolving every time with external and internal factors. In the current times, it is not just the HR leaders who have had to take up new responsibilities, but C suite leaders as well, who had to wear multiple hats to make their workforce feel safe and inclusive in these times. In this episode today, Dave will share with us and take on how he sees the equation between business leaders and HR leaders changing as we move ahead in the new world of work. And to our audience joining us for this live session today, do keep posting your reflections, views, and comments in the comments section. We will take all your questions at the end of the session if time allows. And without any further ado, let me dive right into the conversation with Dave. And I'm really excited to hear your views on this, Dave. The world of work is slowly getting back to normal, but needless to say, the COVID era was an eye opener for many of us. And those learnings are still worth keeping. What are your primary takeaways from the crisis, Dave?
It's hard to have any one takeaway because the last 2 years, actually, it feels like 1 year. I can't separate 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Context is the kingdom. It's the setting in which we live. And the content is the king or the queen that responds to that kingdom. This has been an amazing couple of years. Not only the pandemic, but political toxicity, digital transformation, ESG. We are seeing so much change in the world around us. That's the context. Our challenge as individuals and leaders is to respond. Gary Hamel, my colleague, says if the company can't respond as quickly as the context changes, it won't survive. And so our challenge as business and HR leaders is to create internal organizational processes, we're going to call that human capability, to respond to the external demands that we all live with.
Absolutely, Dave. I think, as you said, there's so much change that's happened at all levels. So, how do you build that capability to deal with change? Change management is not an easy task. People, I think, as human beings, we do not like change as much. So, bringing people together when change is happening and moving forward, building that capability to deal with change. I think that's been one of the biggest learnings in the past 2 3 years. So, great thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, let's come to the role of the leaders that we've seen in the past few years, Dave. It has been evolving every now and then, but the current workforce demands to see a huge shift in what they seek from their leaders as well. What is your take on this? What, according to you, are the differentiating characteristics for anyone to lead with impact in the times that we're living in?
There's a great line in French, and I'm going to demonstrate that I don't speak French very well. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même. The more things change, the more they're the same. Even in the last 2 years, the fundamentals of leadership are much the same. We did books and studies on what are the code of leadership. And then the specifics have changed. So here's the code and the change. One, leaders need to be strategists. Where are we going? Well, in today's world, the strategist has to harness and understand uncertainty, where you started. Can I live in a world? When somebody says to me, Dave, I know the new normal, I look at him and say, you must be very rich because you invested in Google and Amazon and Tesla stock in 2020. Well, I didn't do that. You don't know the new normal. So today, a strategist has to act with agility and harness uncertainty. Two, a leader's got to execute. You got to get stuff done. Today, that execution requires the creation of a strong culture. How do I build a culture that allows me to continually change? Three, a leader's got to take care of his or her people. Today, that leader has got to exercise what I call a caregiver mentality. The emotional trauma and the mental health and well being that I think is going to be post pandemic, and it's getting worse. All of the anxiety, depression, stress, loneliness scores are going up, even post pandemic. Are leaders caregivers today? So, harness uncertainty as strategists, build a culture as executors, manage caregiving as talent managers, human capital. Am I building the future? Am I making sure that people feel better about themselves? Am I investing in the next generation? My great test of leadership, and I'm almost done, I've only got 5. My great test of leadership: do I leave an interaction with you feeling better or worse about myself? Because leaders create a positive future. And the fifth and final dimension: strategy, harness uncertainty; execution, create a culture; talent manager, be a caregiver; human capital developer, be a nurturer that feels better; and the most critical, personal. Are you taking care of yourself?
Wow.
I think leaders need to model what they ask others to do. We see a lot of leadership hypocrisy that gets in trouble. Would you go do this? By the way, I think it's the same as a parent. When we had young children at home, I would tell my 10-year-old or 12-year-old child, clean your room, clean your room. Then when they turned 13 and were a teenager, they looked at me and said, Dad, your room's a mess. You lead with example. And so those are the 5 things: strategy, harness uncertainty; execution, create a culture that outlives you; talent manager, become a caregiver; human capital developer, nurture the next generation; and personal, take care of yourself so you can care for others.
Those are some great points, Dave. But I have a counter question to that. How challenging could that be for one leader to have all these 5 qualities or characteristics at one time? Do you think it's easy managing business, strategizing, taking care of people, taking care of your own self? So, how does it happen?
You know, there's 2 answers to that. One is good leaders form teams, and you put someone on your team who is different from you. I was doing consulting once for a leader, and he called me in and he said, Dave, you and I don't think alike. If we both thought alike, one of us wouldn't be necessary today. And that wouldn't be me, it would be you. We want to surround ourselves with people who complement us, who have different skills.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, good leaders can master at least the basics in all of those skills. The
Mhm.
great work on leadership is you may not be excellent at everything. Am I great? I love to talk about, I don't know if you've ever done, Jasmine, the Myers-Briggs test. Have you ever done the introvert
Mhm.
extrovert test? I don't
No,
know
I
if you've
haven't
ever tested.
actually.
Okay. You have a predisposition to being an introvert or an extrovert, but you can learn the other skills. I actually am about 100% introvert, but I can learn the skills right now of trying to be an extrovert, to engage with people. Strategy, execution, talent, human capital, personal. I can at least get to minimally acceptable in most of those, and I want to excel in a couple. And then surround myself with people who have skills I may not have.
So I think that's a great thought, Dave. I think a lot of leaders take the pressure upon themselves to manage everything. All of these 5 characteristics, and I think that's the struggle leaders have been facing. But if they can build that team around them, surround themselves with the kind of people who can complement their qualities, I think that's going to work a great way. So great points there. Thanks so much for sharing, Dave. So with such differentiating characters comes different styles of leading as well. We all have been witnessing some beautiful ways that leaders have been wearing multiple hats to make their workforce feel more cared for, more included, safe, and happy in these times. What kind of different leadership styles did you see emerge of this time of crisis, Dave?
You know, we think everybody creates their own personal style. One of the themes out of this crisis that I think we've learned is the term I'm going to use is personalization. And let me try to
Mhm.
anchor that. I have 3 children. My wife and I are older. We don't have children at home. We were isolated. We lived in isolation for a period of time, but we had a nice home. We had okay. One of our children, she quit her job so that she could homeschool her children. That was the thing she needed to do. Another daughter, she and her husband both worked 50-50 so that they could share childcare. And our son went to work every day and his wife stayed home. You know what? Everybody is affected differently in this crisis. I think leaders need to treat employees personally. Treat the employees as a person. How do I help you feel the empathy, the emotion, the energy, the experience? I call it the 4 E's: empathy, emotion, experience, emotion, to treat you as a person. And then how do I personalize and tailor the work to your setting? Guess what? Some employees are going to work at home. Knowledge workers, the work I do, the work you might do, we can work in a variety of settings. Some
Yeah.
employees have to go to the office every day, or a doctor, a nurse in a manufacturing plant. We're going to personalize the work relationship. And I think leaders' personal style will be varied based on the situation in which they find themselves.
I totally agree with you. I think, as you said, every person has to be looked at differently, and that's the kind of leadership style that emerges when you treat every person as an individual and tailor make and personalize the experience you can create for them based on that. So that's the kind of leadership we need today. So thanks for sharing that, Dave. Dave, in one of your recent discussions, you talked about how the best leaders demonstrate what they know by doing, and they make sure their actions reflect their intentions, avoiding leadership hypocrisy, and we just spoke about it, and by leading by example. So how do we avoid this leadership hypocrisy? And if you could tell us a little more about what the whole concept of leadership hypocrisy is about.
There's a great line from a religious leader centuries ago. And
Mhm.
his line was, I preach the gospel, whichever gospel it is, and sometimes I use words. Let me say it again. I preach the gospel and sometimes use words. I think leaders do the same thing. For example, a leader says, I worked with one of the great leaders, and I sometimes have shared his name. He's passed away. He was one of the great leaders of the 80s and 90s. And he said, Dave, I demand that my employees practice participative management. And I said, let me listen to that once more. I demand that you practice participative management. No, that's hypocrisy. You can't demand participation because participation means you're participating, not demanding. And I looked down and I said, do you recognize the hypocrisy in that statement? You can't demand participative management. What you can do is model it, be an example of it, preach the gospel, and sometimes use words. I think most leaders don't intend to do bad things, but others judge them by their behaviors, not their actions. That's a great line in coaching that others have used. So to this leader, I said, you want your leaders to be participative. You need to model it. Go listen, go pay attention. And when you model that participation, they will see what you do. And because of what you do, they will start to do the same. I'll give an example of that. It's kind of a funny example. I took 3 years off about 12 or 15 years ago to run a mission for our church. I wore a suit every day. I decided, and I had about 200 young men, mostly reporting to me, who were part of that mission movement, service movement. Every day I would button my coat. So for 1 month, I buttoned my coat every day. I never said a word. At the end of the month, everybody buttoned their coat. And then I unbuttoned my coat every day for a month. And at the end of the month, everybody unbuttoned their coat. And then I'd button for a day and unbutton for a day. By the way, they came in to talk to me and said, President, I have a very serious religious question. I said, what's that? Should I button my coat or unbutton my coat? By the way, I was trying to teach them, don't look at your leader for silly things. Whether I button my coat or unbutton my coat is not what leadership is about. But I learned that people will do what their leaders do. And so as a leader, be very sensitive to the unintended consequences of your behavior. What time do you show up? What questions do you ask? How do you handle a difficult situation? Because your example is more powerful than your words.
That's so beautifully said, Dave, and I love your example. And as you said, we should leaders are like they are like reflective mirrors. So people look up to them and they model their behavior. So if they become role models and they do and they show what they do rather than speak what they do, I think that'll make a lot of differences. Leading from the front, leading with impact, is all about actions today, not about words anymore. So beautifully put. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing that. We spoke a lot about, and we know you just mentioned that as well, that trust, empathy, agility are these are some buzzwords which are now defining the characteristics or factors of a true leader. And this is not just for top leadership but also for team managers who've been leading from the front, especially in these times. How do you see their importance growing when we talk about future leaders, the managers who've been managing people right from the front?
I'm going to go back to something I said because I'm finding it so fascinating for me. Does somebody leave if you're listening to this as a leader, here's the question I'd ask you. How often do people leave an interaction with you feeling better or worse about themselves? And let me give an example. Sometimes it's easy to make people feel good. Wow, we were successful. You're going to get a bonus. You're going to get a career movement. You're going to move from one business to another, and you're going to work for Economic Times, and you're going to be a famous editor. That was for you. That's easy. But how do you help people feel better about themselves when it's not an easy discussion? And let me give an example of that because it's kind of self-coaching. I was coaching a leader recently in a very big company, a very senior business leader. One of the leader's employees made a huge mistake that's going to cost the company millions. This company often used text or email, so the messages were very clearly written. And the text said, "You made a huge mistake that's going to cost us millions. You must improve or you'll be fired." Now, that leader was somebody I was coaching, so we had a deal. Before he would send such a text, he would talk to me. He talked to me. I made 3 changes. Listen to my changes. Number 1, I care about you. Number 2, you have great potential at this company. Then continue to say, you made a big mistake that's going to cost us a lot of money. Do not hide from the mistake. But then number 3, let's learn from it so we can improve. Now, notice you don't hide. Some people say, well, leaders are positive all the time. No, sometimes you need to provide corrective action. The employee made a mistake that's going to cost us money. I care about you. You have great potential. Let's learn so that we can get better. This leader sent me a note 24 hours later. He said, Dave, I got a response I've never received before. And I said, that's leadership. This employee left a difficult conversation feeling better about himself. I hope that's what we can do as leaders. Is my job is to create the next generation. That's that human capital development. How do I make sure that the next generation is doing better even than my generation?
That's beautiful. And how do you enable and empower them to bring their best selves to work? I think that's also very, very important for leaders. But tell me, Dave, leaders have had to make some really tough decisions also in the past few years. How about that conundrum or that, that difficult decision? How do they deal with it? You had to do it. You have to take care of business, but you want to take care of your people too. How do they deal with this dilemma?
One of the things we find in our research and others, and I steal a lot of ideas from very thoughtful people that you publish in the Economic Times, is the navigation of paradox. Leadership has to manage 2 competing agendas, yin and yang. Here's a paradox. I have to care about people and I have to create a competitiveness.
Yes.
How do I navigate that tension? How do I navigate? If all I do is care about people, whatever you do is fine. That's not good leadership. If all I do is say, go succeed, go succeed, go succeed, that's not good leadership. How do I learn to navigate that inherent paradox between caring and being competitive? And when I can navigate that tension, I think that's where great leaders come about. There was a book by Jim Collins, Great Leaders Have a Sense of Humility with Ambition. That's a paradox. Great leaders are top down and bottom up. They're inside out and outside in. They worry about cash flow and they worry about innovation. Those paradoxes are the tensions that create great leadership. And out of that yin and yang, I think is where great leaders are eventually born. And we see that in this setting. There may be a time that you have to let people go.
Yes.
The same issue. I'll give another example because it's such a powerful emotional issue. Do I leave the interaction feeling better or worse about myself? A woman who's one of the best leaders I've ever worked with had to let an employee go. And I said to her, you've got to do it so that that employee feels better about himself. And she said, how do I do that? And I said, I don't have a clue. That's your problem. No, that's so I coached her. An employee came in. She did much the same that I talked about. She looked at the employee and said, I've been thinking a lot about you. This was in COVID. The work that you're trying to do in the new world is not working well for you or for us. I can tell you're not happy. You're not producing. The fit between you and the job doesn't work. And I see it affecting your mental health, your physical health. I see it affecting your family. I want to help you find a position where your gifts and talents will be realized. Will you allow me to help you? And she said, that position may not be at this company, but I'm going to do everything I can to help you. Right after that meeting, this individual called me and he said, Dave, I just had a meeting with this leader and it was one of the best meetings I've ever had. She cares about me and I'm going to find a better job. And he did, and she helped. By the way, that's the kind of leadership that emotion, empathy, and still caring, but being competitive. I mean, that's the tension. We've got to navigate that inherent conflict, which is not easy. I'm not naive about that, but that's the tension we have to manage.
Yeah, and I think leaders who'll be able to manage that will be the ones who'll kind of move to the next level, move to the next world, and be able to deal with the kind of disruption that will come again, because the world is changing constantly and leaders have to keep evolving. But dealing with this paradox and this dilemma, if they can manage this, I think they can manage a lot. So thanks for sharing that, Dave, and a great story that you shared as well. Moving on to our next question, Dave. As the father of modern HR, how do you see the equation between business leaders and HR leaders changing as we move ahead in the new world of work?
I had a, well, I'm going to answer that in two ways. What's the most important thing that a business and or an HR leader can give an employee? And let me ask your listeners to think about this. Is it a sense of belief and purpose, meaning? Number two, is it a sense of becoming better and learning? Number three, is it a sense of belonging community? Four, all the above, or five, none of the above? What's the most important thing we can give an employee? Believe, become, belong, all the above. I've asked that question a lot. Everybody says number four, all the above, and it's wrong. Uh-oh. What's the most important thing we can give an employee in HR or in business? And here's my answer. An organization that succeeds in the marketplace. Let me say that again. The most important thing I can give an employee is a successful company. Because if my company doesn't succeed in the marketplace, there is no workplace. I've had HR people argue with me, but I'm here to make people happy. You're not making them happy if they don't have a job. And the saddest thing you can do is not succeed in the marketplace. So when I talk about HR and business leaders, those two groups come together to help their organization succeed in the marketplace. Are the things we do in HR around our talent, our culture, our people, our employee experience, helping us build value with our customers, our investors, and our communities? When that answer is yes, HR and line managers are both leaders working to help us succeed in the marketplace. So HR has a unique set of skills. And I'm talking too long now, but our underlying assumption in HR is that HR is not about HR. It's about helping the organization succeed in the marketplace.
Now that's a very, very interesting point. I don't think people really look at it like that. They think that their primary task is to take care of people, and business leaders' primary task is to just lead the business. But if you look at it like that, that if you could create a successful business, it inadvertently helps you create better, people, and people who you're taking care of your people in that way. So that's how business leaders and HR leaders can come together. That will be the ideal equation to deal with for organizations going forward. So great point there. Thanks, Dave, so much. Coming to our final question today, what advice would you give for our hybrid leaders now? We have leaders who are leading people who are in different locations, different time zones, working from anywhere. What advice would you give to leaders like that, where you cannot communicate the way you used to earlier?
There's a lot of buzz right now about hybrid work, anywhere, anytime, any place through technology, and we've lived with it. I'm working in my where I live in the United States. You're in India, somebody else is in China, wherever you are. Everybody's excited about where you work and how you work. Are you working through technology? Or are you face to face? I believe where leaders come together is not on those questions, where and how. But I believe good leadership is about why and what. So here's my answer to that question that's a little bit different. Wherever an employee is working, it could be in an office together, it could be at home, it could be on an airplane, it could be in a hotel, it could be anywhere. Why are you at work today? To create value for a customer. What did you do as an employee today that will help a customer or an investor or the community have a better experience? I don't care where you're working. I don't care how you're working. When we unify about why we're here, we work. And that's the what. Why is to serve customers. What did you do to make that happen? And our unity, we call that outside in, is to create value for a customer. When we're unified in that agenda, leadership works. Now, there's a whole bunch of behaviors. Leaders need to check in. They need to correlate the employee experience with the customer experience. But I think the issue is not as where we work and how we work. There's a lot of interest in hybrid work, anywhere, anytime, any place. My interest is in value added work. What did we do that created value for a customer? That's why we're at work today. And by the way, the beauty of that is it's a spiral. It succeeds. If I create value for a customer through the employees we've got, I'll be able to give the employee a better experience. And if I give them a better experience, I'll create value. The correlation between the employee experience and the customer experience is generally 0.6 to 0.8. Here's my final insight about people. Our employees are people. Our customers are people. Our investors are people. And our job to manage people is to get the employee, the customer, the investor, and the community all working together on the same agenda. That's my hope.
That's lovely. I think. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing that. Any final words that you could tell us about if you envision a leader of the future, the kind of world that we're living in? It is going to remain uncertain. Maybe they're different. If you could give us a one-liner description of what the leader of the future would look like, what would that be, Dave?
I love the idea of uncertainty because we can't predict the new normal. So I did some writing a year ago about how do you harness uncertainty? We call it risk in finance. We call it VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex in the military. We call it variance in statistics. About 3 months ago, it hit me, I'm wrong. How do you harness uncertainty? You don't focus on what's uncertain. You focus on what's certain. For example, I was talking to a person named Chris. He had two sons, 20 and 22. Chris, where are they going to go to school? I don't know. Who are they going to marry? I don't know. Where are they going to live? I don't know. What jobs will they have? I don't know. Chris, your sons are living in a world of uncertainty. And I said, Chris, what do you know about your two sons? And he said, what do you mean? I said, will you love them no matter what? And he said, oh, Dave, not even a question. By the way, I get emotional with that. So I say to the leader, yes, the world's uncertain. You don't know if it's going to be COVID, a war in the Ukraine, a new type metaverse. I was told I had to become an avatar. I had to discover what that was. You're going to live in a world of uncertainty. Don't go there. Don't chase the uncertainty. Stop. What do I know? What are my core values? What are the relationships that I can trust? Focus on certainty in a world of uncertainty. That would be my headline.
I love that, Dave. I think, as you said, focus on what you know. I think that's the best lesson any leader can have for the future that we are talking about. If you can focus on certainty in the world of uncertainty, that's where you are. So, on that note, that was all the time we had with this for this conversation, Dave. We could go on. There's so much to learn from you, but a few words that I take away from our conversation today is leaders have to lead from the front. They have to become role models. They have to do actions more than just words. They have to work with emotion and empathy, and they have to be sure that they manage competitiveness along with care for their people. So that's how beautiful leadership would be. That's how leaders of the future should be. So thank you so much, Dave. There was so much to learn, so much to take away from this conversation today.
Yasmin, thank you. What a gift. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, everyone, thank you. It was a great pleasure hosting everyone today. Please stay tuned for the update on our next episode of Transformation Talks. See you all super soon. Until then, stay safe and take care. Thank you once again.